Hi there, I'm Pete Hammond. I'll be moderating this edition of Half Hour With, and I'm so excited because we have a half hour with these incredibly talented people behind the movie Society of the Snow, which has been nominated for an Academy Award for Best International Film. It is was the entry from Spain and now is among the five finalists for the Oscar. Very exciting. And it's done ever since it premiered as the closing night film of the Venice Film Festival. It's won widespread critical acclaim and lots of awards and talk and excitement over this story. It comes from director and co-writer Juan Antonio Bayona, who, first of all, many of his movies, Jurassic World, Monster Calls, and of course, The Orphanage, which was his first, The Impossible. I think this movie's taking him back to his roots here, and we're so happy to have him here. Welcome, Juan Antonio Bayona, to Half Hour With. Hi.
Hi, thank you so much for having us.
The lead, really, and the narrator of the film. In addition to that, he plays Numa, and this is the actor Enzo Vogrincic. Hi, Enzo.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Good to see you again. And also, you see the two gentlemen up there. They are the actual survivors, real life survivors of Flight 571, and it is an honor to have you here on Half Hour With. Let me introduce you, Roberto Canessa. Hi, Roberto.
How are you?
And Gustavo Zerbino. Hi, how are you?
Pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you all for joining us. We also have an interpreter here, and that would be Lorna. Hi, Lorna. Thanks for joining us as well and helping with the English. And let's just get right into it. Juan, I just want to ask you, after all the success, you've done big Hollywood movies now since your, stunning debut with The Orphanage. You went back to your roots, I believe, here and made a Spanish language movie of a story that is 50 years ago happened. There have been films made about it. What was your reason for wanting to dive into this story?
Well, I had to. I mean, from the very beginning, since I read Pablo Bierci's book, Society of the Snow, that is a very different take on the story that we all knew, because it's written 35 years after the plane crash. So these two guys that you see, they're not anymore the 20 years old guys that they were when they worked in the first book, Alive. They had all the weight of the time that had passed. That's one of the interesting things about the book. It's not about the fact, it's about the spirit. And that makes the story much, much bigger. The movie becomes like a searching of meaning to it. And that makes it a lot bigger.
Yeah, I have seen the other films and all the books and the stories about it, but this was brand new to me when I first saw this movie. I had never seen it from this point of view, and one that honors the dead as well as the survivors. So you can call it a story of survival, but it's much more than that. And we're going to take a look at the trailer for the film, which is currently streaming on Netflix around the world. You can see it. And in theaters too. So let's take a look at Society of the Snow.
Por favor, abróchense cinturones.
¿Sabemos dónde estamos?
Mírame a los ojos. Mírame a los ojos.
De avión no se ve.
Y aunque pasen por encima nuestro, no van a ver.
¿Qué pasa cuando el mundo te abandona? Cuando no tenés ropa y te estás congelando.
¡No vamos a llegar hasta arriba!
Cuando no tenés comida y te estás muriendo.
Si no comemos, nos vamos a morir.
¿Comer qué?
Yo no me voy a quedar acá. ¿Ahora se van a dejar morir? ¿Después de todo lo que pasa?
Vos tenés las mejores piernas del equipo. Tenés que caminar por los demás.
¡Agárrate de mí! ¿Lo ves? Hay que intentarlo.
Wow. That's some trailer, and the movie is like 10 times that. So it's amazing. Boy, when we look at those locations, Juan, up there, you felt it was important to actually go to the actual site, the locations, but isn't that logistically a nightmare to try to shoot there?
Yeah, that was one of the biggest challenges in making this film. The fact that it's set up in a location that it's impossible to shoot. So we basically were there with a group of professional climbers and a group of visual effects people who took pictures of everything. They spent 3 weeks shooting backgrounds, and I took the advantage that they were there to visit the place and live the experience of being there. That first time that we went, there was not much snow, so we had to go back at the end of the shoot, and that's when I went with Enzo. We went with him, and we were able to shoot some shots with Numa. So he was able also to experience the mountain. It's impossible to tell the story if you don't tell the context. It's one of those stories that you need to understand what were the conditions they were living in, to understand how epic it was and why they did what they did.
Yeah. And Enzo, this is a real challenge for an actor to be. I mean, did you go through some sort of boot camp? How do you prepare to play a role like this in these kinds of harrowing conditions and just this story, which is heavily emotional and, and has all those human elements as well?
Como si no hubiera una real manera para prepararse. De alguna manera uno se prepara, tuvimos mucho ensayo, 2 meses de ensayo, una preparación, uno conoce la historia, investiga, estudia, sabe todo lo que puede saber sobre la historia, pero después te toca enfrentarte a las condiciones del rodaje, donde ahí se pone en presente la cosa y uno empieza a reaccionar de alguna manera a los elementos. Por suerte todo es real, entonces la reacción es instantánea, el frío lo sentís, el hambre la empezás a sentir y cada vez es un poco más y un poco más y un poco más, salvando las distancias con lo real, que es muy difícil de tener el elemento primordial, que es la muerte y esa sensación de no poder salir, que eso es realmente lo más fuerte de toda esta historia. Y eso no lo tenés en un rodaje, eso es lo que hay que actuar, eso es lo que toca actuar. Entonces uno se prepara sobre todo para esa parte, para la parte emocional, para poder resolver las escenas en lo que eso te implica en lo emocional. Porque lo físico está dado, entonces eso es simplemente entregarte a vivirlo y a sufrirlo un poco. Parecería que para contar la historia no hay manera de contarla si uno no atraviesa un poco de dolor y un poquito de dolor se atravesó, un poquito de esa experiencia física es lo que te libera al final para poder actuar lo emocional y dedicarte a eso y encontrarte en el set con eso que no podés preparar y tenés que resolver ahí.
Well, there's no real way to prepare for something like this. In a way, you do because we had 2 months of rehearsal. We studied, we rehearsed, we learned everything that we could. But then we actually face in the filming, we face the conditions, and then we react to the elements, which were right there, the cold, the hunger, and they were constantly increasing. Now, what there is one element that we didn't have that the survivors actually lived through, which is the sense of death and to not being able to get out. So that is something that we have to act and that we prepare for the emotional aspect of it to be able to access it. Because the physical, it is a given that you're gonna live through that. Now, it feels like this is the type of story that in order to tell it, you have to live through it, you have to suffer it a little bit. And so in this physical part, in facing these physical conditions, it kind of releases you to be able to access the emotional part and be able to tell it.
Wow. Juan, how difficult was it to cast this movie in the way that you saw it? Because everybody in it is phenomenal. I mean, they work as a team here in bringing it to life.
Well, it took us 9 months. I saw like around 2000 self-tapes, and it was during the pandemic, so it made it even harder. So I couldn't meet them in person. I was in Spain while I was watching videos from Uruguay and Argentina. Then I started to do auditions, but they were online. And the group was smaller, was getting smaller until I finally saw in person around between 30, 40 actors live in Uruguay. But that was the result of watching and working with many actors for 9 months.
Wow. What was it about Enzo right there? Let me just ask, since you're sitting right next to him.
I had the luxury of interviewing the survivors for many hours, so I had an idea of who they were. So I was also not looking for a resemblance. It was kind of fun that they look alike, but also the personalities. And I think Enzo embodies so well the novelty of Numa, that he was so good-hearted. But at the same time, the suffering. There is something about Enzo that reflects some kind of conflict, inner conflict. You know, I was watching every day how Enzo was struggling with trying to do it better and better and better, which is what Numa was doing in the mountain all the time, trying to be better and better. So for me, that was a way of finding not also a great actor that look alike Numa, but also somebody who was sharing some traits of his personality with the character. Totally. And you know, as I said, it was about capturing not the fact, but the spirit. And by telling the story through the eyes of somebody who's dead, suddenly you can touch this metaphysical aspect immediately.
Yeah, it's fascinating. How closely did you get to work with the survivors? I'm going to be talking to them right now, but how important was that for you in this whole process of making this film?
It was fundamental. We wanted to do the most faithful and respectful portrait of what happened. It was a labor of love. We put so much attention on detail that their collaboration was very important. Not only the collaboration from the survivors, but also from the families of the dead, especially to rescue their names, because not a single version of the film was able to use the real names of the dead. And for me, it was so important that all these families had the chance to watch this film and see the real names on the screen. So we actually decided to put the names on the screen. Literally, you can read them on the screen before a list with a survivor is read on the radio.
What was that first screening like for them? I know that was very emotional when they all got to see the film.
I think Gustavo had the idea, and I think it's better maybe if you explain that, Gustavo, because it was your idea to show the film to everyone at the same time, not only the survivors, but also the families of the dead.
Yeah, Gustavo, what was that like?
Bueno, yo voy a hablar en español primero, que es un orgullo y un placer que J. Bayona y su equipo hayan hecho esta película. Y después que la vimos, la película que era tan extraordinaria que te hacía sentir desde lo más profundo de tu ser, estar en el mismo lugar, las vivencias, las emociones, las vivías nuevamente, que era importante que la película la viéramos todos juntos en el mismo lugar. Por eso hablé con J, Belén y Sandra en el hotel, que teníamos que proponerle a las familias de lo que no volvieron a verlas con nosotros. J me dijo que estaba de acuerdo, si ellos estaban de acuerdo, hicimos una reunión y le pareció muy buena idea. Y para mí fue genial, fue una de las cosas extraordinarias porque en el mismo local, 350 personas, cuando termina la película, se levantan de pie, aplauden, lloran y se abrazan. Habían vivido la misma experiencia que se le había transmitido Bayona, la misma montaña, las mismas circunstancias, y los actores que murieron tenían su nombre, tenían el día que murieron, la edad. Era algo muy, muy realista y excepcional. O sea que esta película logró, gracias a Bayona y al libro de Bierzi, que se uniera un agujero que había, donde el mismo día se entendió perfectamente la caminata extraordinaria de Roberto y de Nando en esas montañas majestuosas que la mente dice que es imposible, y todos esos límites fueron pulverizados por el amor, el trabajo en equipo y la entrega total que refleja la película Bayona. O sea que es una genialidad. Los familiares que murieron le agradecen profundamente a Jota porque hoy entendieron todos y son parte de una historia que nos unió para siempre.
First of all, it is pride. I feel pride and pleasure in having J.A. and his team made the movie, which was quite extraordinary. And after watching it, I can tell you it made us feel all over the experience again. And I thought it was important to have the movie we watch at the same time, both by the survivors and their families, and also the families of those who didn't come back. So we talked about it. I talked to the families of the deceased and to Jota's team, and they all agreed that it was a good idea. And it was brilliant to have that auditorium filled with 350 people that at the end, they all stood up in an ovation, crying because they had lived through the same experiences and circumstances. And what was also quite extraordinary is that the actors who portrayed those who didn't come back were the same age as those who didn't. So that was this movie was is such a beauty and it's so extraordinary. It's thanks both to the work of J.A. Bayona and also the book of Pablo Bierzi. And we were and also all of this was thanks to the extraordinary walk that Nando and Roberto did through those majestic mountains. And something that this movie reflects is that team spirit. We're in this together, we're working together. And so the families of those who didn't come back feel grateful that they were able to have this experience. And then we were able to have this experience together with the movie.
Roberto, can you talk about that and your real life experience in doing that extraordinary walk? And it was almost when they were finally rescued there, thanks to you and getting to these people, it was like a Christmas miracle. It was 2 days before Christmas, and this movie opened on that day, at least here in America. And so, I mean, it seemed like just an inspiring story beyond inspiring and truly remarkable in that way.
Well, you must learn that we were stranded at 10,000 feet. We had to climb 15,000 feet. The temperatures were 30 degrees below zero. We were starving. I lost 30 kilograms. I was very fit. I was a rugby player. And all this environment and the thrill of filming on the same place. There are places that we were just climbing very steep and the cameras couldn't stand there. The other day, Jota was telling me about it. It's the authenticity of the film. We're speaking about adventures. We are speaking about adventures of young men. This is one of the components that maybe is very much left out of the filming experience. The nights in the mountain with those gleaming stars. And at the same time, so nice and so terrible that you begin to hear avalanches. When we were walking, you see tons and tons of snow dislodging, and you feel so small and so little. And on the first night, we walked too much, and we were very wet, and was very steep, and we couldn't put the sleeping bags. And you feel that you're dying, and you're like a bacteria there. And then we found a place to put the sleeping bag, and the wind stopped, and we had warm clothes again, and a humongous moon appeared around and illuminated all the valley, and I couldn't believe that I was enjoying. And that's the capacity of human beings, and this is the kind of limits that the film is showing you. And this is why it's so unique. And this is why I support the film, because young people have to learn the capacity of human beings that is very anesthetized nowadays because we have everything. So this is why I push. The people, 15, 16-year-olds come around. My grandson, 10 years old, say, hey, dad, granddad, this is very strong. My 4-year-old grandson says, Grandpa, I want to climb mountains like you. And I see I have another survivor blood in the family. So the adventure part of the film is great. It's gorgeous. And this is one of the components of the film. They have so many components that the people would say, oh, you have to eat the dead people. This was only fuel. We had to walk out of there. Yeah. And this is what is very, very nicely portrayed by Jota and Enzo and the actors and these guys that we are like brothers now.
Yeah, that's amazing. And you did bring up the thing, because when people hear the story, they say, "Oh, is that the one where they ate the dead?" It's so well handled here, and it's subtle, but it's so powerful, particularly a scene where permission is given to one of the survivors to go for two of the dead, his mother and sister. It's just like, wow. I mean, tears fill up when you see that. And that's powerful, rather, Juan, than showing it vividly and, in an exploitation style.
But that's one of the key elements of the film, that it's not about taking, it's about giving.
Yeah.
That's the biggest difference with the other versions, they focus in taking. And I think from the moment the movie is about people who give the only thing that they have left, it's about love, it's about generosity, it's about understanding the pain the other ones across of you are suffering. It's about empathy, so it's a very different story.
It's a very different story, and it's so powerful there. I'm going to show another scene from it now. This is a scene where you're in what remains of the wreckage, and their survivors are there and talking, and take a look at what happens. Here is a scene from Society of the Snow.
Mientras una tragedia se desata desde mi hamaca, veo a varios superhéroes sin capa. Y aunque a veces me gana la ira, estar con ustedes es un regalo de la vida.
Aunque estamos en este avión muertos de frío, qué afortunado es Coco tener sus pies acá conmigo. Pero Coco, no te vayas acostumbrando, que nos volvemos a Uruguay, que nos están esperando.
Amor. A ver, Coquito, yo me voy más por lo sentimental. El 13 de octubre cumplió mi mamá. Y lo único que le pido a Dios, como regalo, volver, para el festejo no perder.
Acá hay mucha gente decente y hay otros que no saben ni dónde queda el Oriente, ni quién es el presidente. Bueno, por lo menos laburo yo, hay otros que no hacen nada.
En la montaña la situación es intensa. Me dan ganas de echarme a correr como un puma. Pero no puedo irme de aquí sin antes escuchar una del reservado Numa.
En esta heladísima montaña, donde no camina ni media araña, en la heladera, en la montaña de la heladera fría. De la montaña.
¡Vamos, Numa! ¡Vamos!
Wow. That's heavy, and wonderful acting, Enzo. They're beautifully delivered, and I'm wondering what goes through your mind as an actor when you're playing a scene like that.
En estas escenas era La escena de la avalancha fue lo más complicado. Fue una escena muy, muy difícil de filmar, muy agotadora, muy dolorosa. Pero eran esas escenas que te conectaban muy fuerte con lo real, porque conectabas con la historia, entonces la entendías profundamente y las emociones aparecían solas y era muy, muy sencillo conectar con lo emocional, con esas historias, porque era muy exigente, era muy demandante y era muy duro. Lo lindo de esta escena en particular, que la filmamos todos juntos, es que claro, nosotros ya éramos amigos cuando estábamos filmando. Antes de empezar a filmar ya éramos amigos. Entonces todas estas escenas se hacían fáciles porque nos mirábamos y realmente nos reíamos. Pasamos creo que 2 días enteros filmando esta secuencia previa a la avalancha, rimando, improvisando y divirtiéndonos entre nosotros y todo eso, toda esa naturalidad de la amistad que se ve ahí ya era parte de nuestra amistad y nuestra naturalidad. Entonces eran escenas lindas que las disfrutabas y no sé, salían naturalmente, fluían, eran lindas de filmar. Después está la avalancha que ya es otro planeta donde se sufre simplemente y es agotador.
Well, the avalanche scene was one of the most challenging. It was a very complex scene to film, and it was hard, and it was a long time. But it is that type of scene that connects you to the story and makes you understand deeply the feelings and emotions, and that way you connect easier to those emotions. So those hard those hard demanding conditions allows you to connect to that beauty. And actually that scene prior to the avalanche, we were actually all friends. We became friends since before filming, and so we were sitting there with each other, and I think it took 2 days to film that scene. So it's 2 days together, rhyming, improvising. So it was that natural flow of friendship flowing among us, and it was such a beautiful film to uh just a scene to film. And so then the avalanche, that's a whole other game.
Yeah. That's for sure. Also, congratulations. This film not only is nominated for Best International Film, but also for makeup and hairstyling. So I was looking particularly in that scene and different things. And, some people might wonder, okay, what was the challenge for makeup and hairstyling here that has gone all the way to the Oscars? Can you talk about that aspect of it?
Yeah, I think they did an extraordinary job in going along with the actors. Sometimes it's difficult to separate the work of the actors with makeup because they go hand by hand. To tell you an example of how extraordinary was what they did, they spent 3 months studying each of the performers, taking a picture of each of them. All the actors let their hair grow for 3 months and took a picture, and they study each single of them to understand how they're going to behave during the shoot. So they knew exactly what was the process to follow. They shot chronologically, and then they were always a very important part of the performance because the makeup artists were going where the actors couldn't go for healthy reasons. Without adding too much, we always bet on doing something very naturalistic, very real. But to tell you the truth, you can tell how good was what they were doing. The actors, only by watching themselves in the mirror, knew exactly what they were shooting, for the way they look like, and it's so rich when you take a look at the details, all the layers of dirt, all that, how the skin has been burned by the sun, how with very little details they help to give the impression of how much weight they have lost, only by adding some teeth or very little prosthetics under the eyes. It was a very, very complicated shoot because everything was very subtle, and it was very helpful for the actors to take them where they couldn't go for, as I said, for healthy reasons.
Wow. Roberto and Gustavo, can you tell me your reaction to looking at the actors there in recreating that and what you felt as having actually lived it and looking at the authenticity, which is the key thing I think you said, Roberto, there in regard to the actors?
La verdad que J hizo un trabajo extraordinario que nos impactó mucho, porque ver las fotografías reales de nuestros amigos que estaban muertos, pero en la película, de repente la foto se empiezan a mover y los actores caminan. Entonces es un impacto muy fuerte ver a tus amigos que estaban muertos vivos, que caminan y se mueven en un ambiente que era exactamente el mismo. Es una de las genialidades que tiene esta película, que está recreada en el mismo lugar, las mismas montañas, y te hace experimentar y sentir desde todos tus poros, pero desde las entrañas, una vivencia emocional única, irrepetible. Y eso es lo que tiene esta película, que el detalle mínimo de la vestimenta, la foto, la recreación es exacta. Entonces, a nosotros nos transportó a esa montaña de una manera que 10 minutos de la película vimos un día con Jota porque fue muy generoso y quería que Coche, que estaba muy enfermo, la viera. O sea que esos 10 minutos a nosotros nos dejaron sin aliento. Y me acuerdo que Soledad, la mujer de Coche, dijo que quería ver más y le pedimos por favor que no. Y salimos todos a la noche a respirar y reponernos, porque fue muy fuerte. Es como que si a un volcán le sacan la tapa y explotan todas esas emociones en el presente. Pero eran 10 minutos y nosotros tuvimos 73 días y la película dura 2 horas y media. O sea que si J logra en 2 horas y media que todo eso que vivimos se recree de una manera tan extraordinaria. Por eso el mundo está impactado, choqueado de ver en segundos, en 2 horas y media, una vivencia que es realmente extraordinaria, que muestra cómo el ser humano frente a la adversidad, si trabaja unido atrás de un objetivo común y hace todo lo que se requiere, lo necesario y haga falta, logra su objetivo, se lo hace con amor, solidaridad y amistad.
So what JA did was extraordinary and it quite impacted us because it's like seeing the picture of your deceased friend. And then all of a sudden, like this picture is moving because it's like you see the movie and it's like you see those friends that have passed on moving in the same environment that you used to know them. And so this is one of the brilliant things that this movie is uh, doing because he's making us feel the experience and it's recreating everything that we saw and that we lived through and it really transported us to that moment. So Jota was quite generous because our friend Coche was quite sick and so he showed him some snippets of the movie. So we saw 10 minutes in and we were quite moved, and Soledad, Coche's wife, asked to see more and we said no. We had to take a walk that evening to process that because it felt like a volcano erupting with all those hidden emotions coming to the surface. So it is amazing that this movie in 2 hours can recreate what we lived through in 73 days. And this is something that it's amazing the world to be able to see all this experience, but also to see what happens when you have a group of people coming together, united in the sense of solidarity, friendship, and love coming together towards a common purpose and what is possible.
Roberto, do you feel like you've been given this responsibility to carry on this message through this film, through other things, through your whole life, like you talk about, to get this never forgotten and remind people about what happened, but more about hope and life and everything you've learned in all the decades since then?
Well, it was a huge responsibility when I was alive and my friends were dead, and I thought I had to live a honorable life. That they would say my son died and look, this jerk is going around fooling around. This is something very personal that I had a chance to take the challenge, and this is the same attitude as in the mountain. I mean, I enjoy being in groups where people give their best. When I was very afraid of walking out of the mountain, and Arturo Nogueira, he said, "I look at you and I imagine how great you feel." And I told him, I feel horrible, like you do. And he said, no, 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 my friend. You're helping other people. You don't understand how good you feel. I have my legs broken and I am a parasite. And I rely on people like you that can walk out of here. And that was incredible because I had the transition from a victim to heroism. I had the chance of walking from my friends. And then he put it down to earth and he said, look, this couldn't be more than 70 kilometers to the west. There are many things we don't know, but for sure to the west is Chile. And if you're able to walk 70 kilometers, we will be out of here. And I thought 100,000 steps to the west. And that would be the chance of, and then I look from the side to God and I say, hey, I need your help. If you put a wall, put some places where I can put my nails to walk on. And then I make this alliance with God. So if I would fail, it wouldn't be my fault because I was going to give my best. But this transition of being in a group where you must give your best is what people are telling their groups. Go to groups where people give their best. I could have stayed there in the comfort zone in a very ironical way, but I choose to die walking in the pure snow, not to die there in the fuselage where people were peeing and everything full of bones and everything. And this is the kind of lessons that the mountain gave me. And then, as I told you, I had the challenge to walk out and honor life. I think we must honor life lots more, not for ourselves, but also the people that are around us.
A perfect way to end this. An inspiring message, but a hell of a thriller too. This movie is so well made. Congratulations. We'll see you at the Oscars, and thank you for joining us today on Half Hour with.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
guys.
Thank you so much.